The sun's ray shot daggers into my eyelids, forcing me from my backyard slumber. I blinked my eyes awake, just in time to watch a cascade of leaves float down onto a pile collected beneath the tree my wife and I planted so long ago. As I stared longingly at the display of red and yellow, my mind wandered off to a better time. A time where she and I sat side by side, our hands interlocked in a lover's embrace, watching the wind carry the leaves against its current, the backdrop of blurred forest trees swaying off in the distance. For 20 years I humoured her silly habit. I never quite found leaf watching to be the pinnacle of my day, and yet there I was, watching a smile that seemed to steal the sun's light, hoarding it all for itself while shrouding the world in grey. When she passed, I vowed to keep the tradition alive, and every fall, as the first sheet of yellow splayed across the tanning green, I was here, waiting until the last leaf lowered itself to the ground below. It was cancer that struck her, her fight only lasting a few years before the call of Chiron's ferry whisked her down the river Styx. Time had since rendered me fugue, as though I drank from the river of Lethe, trapping the only memories I had in a nightmare's past. I would give anything to have her back, even petitioning Hades himself in a game of wits for the winning soul. As I looked on, struggling to outline the trail of lost memories, something caught my eye betwixt the leaves. My lifetime scavenger hunt had to wait. My eyes squinted instinctively, trying their best to make out the strange object. It was faint, like a television signal straining through the static, fighting its way into existence. Then, as if God himself had decided a cruel joke should fall upon me, the leaves beneath the tree shot upwards in a swirling frenzy, encasing the ever-growing entity in an armor of yellow. I was transfixed with fear as the black magic display brought to life the umbric mass. I ducked closer, faintly making out the form of what looked to be a human being. It stood still and erect, the leaves spiraling around its ethereal body like Charybdis engulfing a galley. In its hands was a box, as bright and vibrant as the being wasn't. A black wooden box adorned with a golden heart. Its very presence feigned a sense of familiarity, but I was sure as rain. I'd never seen such a thing. As the leaves swept past, it moved, inching its way towards me. I reeled back against my seat, my heart quickening against my chest. It opened the box. The sound of a familiar chime echoed through the hollow air. Au clair de la lune. The French lyrics danced through my head as the diapason played on. My eyes grew wide. A music box. The same embroidered beauty I bought for my wife a few months before she passed. The same one I'd buried her with. My eyes stayed fixed upon the box, but just as the melody began to fade, so did the creature, and in an instant it was gone. Fearing its return, I rushed inside, as quickly as an old man could, closing the door behind me. I was shaking worse than a man lined up for his go at the brazen bull. Just what was that mysterious beast, and how did it come to be in possession of that box? I spun around to face the door and peered through the peephole. It seemed to have disappeared for now. I watched as the sun wiped below the horizon, a mix of gold and red reflected beautifully off the hilltops. Grace would have loved this, I thought to myself before tiring towards the direction of my bed. The next morning I awoke with a cold shiver running down my spine, and no clue as to what put it there. At 5 p.m. sharp, I sat upon the porch bench my wife begged me to purchase, parked 3 feet away from the tree that we planted together. I was just beginning to doze off when the fallen leaves began to spiral about. I watched. A look of confusion painted itself across my face. The leaves shot off in my direction, obstructing my vision. I covered my face as well as I could. The leaves rammed into my body with the force of Cerberus's bite. One by one, they sliced into my flesh like the talons of an eagle ripping its way into prey. After what seemed like hours, the ambush stopped. I slowly pulled my hands away from my face. Strips of red rushed down my arms, staining my shirt. I looked up towards the tree. A figure dressed in black stood about 10 feet away, an axe gripped tightly within its hands. My heart stopped cold, frozen with fear. I desperately wanted to call the cops or run for my life, but all I could do was watch on in horror, wondering if my unwanted visitor would become my executioner. It moved a few inches closer, revealing itself to be a woman. Her hair was as black as an onyx stone, her face hidden beneath its shadow. The axe was covered in blood, leaking onto the ground below. Her mouth split open, stretching itself apart as if glue once held it together. Blood pooled from the rippled tears. Her eyes glowed a milky white. "Remember." The words spilled from her mouth in a garbled tone, her voice barely audible. Her body split into chunks. Pieces crawled to the ground like an avalanche making its way down a mountainside. Muscles lost their grip on the bone, piling in clumps around the fallen cadaver. Her flesh creaked to life, inching its way in my direction. I leaped from my chair, rushing into my home as if Usain Bolt possessed my veins. What the hell was she? I thought to myself, searching for an answer I knew would never come. My heart raced against feet as I ran to the comfort of the room my wife and I once shared. I hid beneath the bed, a cold sweat running down the center of my neck. The sight of an old man cowering like a child, hiding from the bogeyman, would have given even Zeus some delight. I tucked my body into itself, shivering with fright well into the night before drifting away into a deep slumber. The feeling of terror tightly clutched my veins, bringing my infatuation with carrying on my wife's tradition to a standstill. That afternoon, I sat, coffee in hand, staring at the lime-green curtains adorning the window that looked out upon the tree. Fear became my mind's keeper, and for that day it wandered for the cause. I watched as an ever-growing shadow crept across the fabric of the curtains, signaling the day's end. I'd spent the entire day in cowardice, and now it was time for bed. Before I could leave the comfort of my chair, the screeching sound of nails grinding against glass cut through the air and pierced my drums. I froze like a fawn caught in the lights of an oncoming bus. A trail of faint whispers followed the deafening sound, forcing my labored breaths into panic mode. My eyes snapped in the direction of the window. The lure of curiosity pulled at my gut while my heartstrings played tug-of-war with my hands slowly reaching towards the curtains. With one fluid motion, I swept them to the side, my gaze meeting the grotesque sight of my wife's rotting corpse. I backed away in horror, falling over in the chair beneath me. Our eyes interlocked, never leaving the sight of the other. Her whispers echoed past their glass barrier, growing louder and louder, transforming into a terrifying scream. "You did this to me, you murderer!" Her fist pounded the glass until it cracked. Blood covered the glass with each strike, her screams growing into banshee-like howls. "You will pay for what you've done." With one last pound of her fist, an explosion of shards shot across the room. I hid under the table beside me, covering my face with my hands, hoping that somehow I would awake from this nightmare. An eerie silence broke through the panic, and for a fraction of a second, I thought I'd imagined the entire ordeal. But as fast as the silence fell, the whispers began anew. Footsteps creaked against the wooden floors, moving closer and closer before stopping directly in front of me. I slowly lowered my hands from my face. My blood ran cold as my gaze met with the hallowed eyes of my lovely Grace. Her face was covered in holes slung together by scrapes of flesh. Black liquid oozed from her orifices. Her face crept into an unnerving smile, stretching farther than any mouth should. Her mouth parted in two, displaying several rows of sharp fangs that lined the insides. She screamed, tightly gripping my throat, her breath reeking of decay. My neck crumbled like hardened putty in her hands. One word burned from her lips, as if repeat pressed itself against her lungs. Remember. Then, as if struck by the lasso of truth, one by one the memories of that night played like a slideshow drenched in blood. I remembered how beautiful she was beneath the moon's light as we made our way towards the campsite that night. I remembered the soft feel of her hand as I led her down the gravel trail that scaled the forest floor. I remembered the touch of her silky black hair against my face as we danced the night away to the sounds of the world that surrounded us. I remembered the text that exposed my infidelities. I remembered the argument, and I remembered watching the life drain from my wife's eyes as I strangled her to death. Tears rolled down my face as I reminisced upon the crime I committed so long ago. 20 years ago, her body lay in pieces deep within the alpine forest. Now she kneeled before me, strangling me within an inch of my life. I struggled to rip free from her grip, flailing around like a wild animal caught within a deadly trap. Eventually breaking free, I stumbled to my feet, racing down to the safety of my basement. I could hear her closing in behind me as I rounded the corner towards the door. Icy fingers clawed at my shoulder, trying to trap hold as I made my way towards the door. The pitter-patter of feet echoed behind me. My heartbeat quickened, matching its pace. I struggled on, still feeling the frozen grip of my former lover's hands wrapped around my throat. My mind crept towards my gun cabinet, and before I knew it, I was prying it open, fishing for my rifle placed inside. Just as my fingers reached to grab it, the basement door bust open, and from it a deafening screech pierced my ears. I panicked as I searched for a hiding spot, eventually finding one within the closet only meters away. I quickly snagged the gun, rushing over to the solace of the closet as footsteps once again closed in front of me. I held the gun close to my chest, holding my breath as though I was submerged underwater. A loud bang found its way upon the door, slowly growing into a stampede of blows, threatening to knock it off its hinges. I thought back to that night once more, remembering the last words my wife uttered to me right before I watched her soul rip from her body. I will haunt you until you too meet the same fate. I knew this night would never end as long as we both walked this earth. Just as the closet door flew open, I positioned the gun beneath my chin and closed my eyes, pulling the trigger just before her bony fingers reached my neck. I awoke, the sun's rays shining like daggers into my eyes, planted upon the bench sat in the path of the tree my wife and I had planted. I woke in time to watch the final leaf sink down on top of the pile that collected beneath it. I was never fond of her habit of watching the leaves fall beneath the tree, but the joy it brought her every afternoon was well worth the time wasted. As I stared off into the distance, I could see the faint outline of a human figure. I looked closely, noticing a foreign object held within its hands. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.